Welcome back. We're in Revelation chapter 18. I'm going to be reading from verse 11. And we're at this funeral, this kind of funeral, and we hear three different voices at this funeral. We've heard the first one already, and we're going to hear the second and third ones now. So from verse 11, chapter 18. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind, made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron and marble, cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh and frankincense, of wine and olive oil, of fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and human beings sold as slaves. They will say, "The fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your luxury and splendor have vanished, never to be recovered." The merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out, "Woe, woe to you, great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold, precious stones and pearls. In 1 hour such great wealth has been brought to ruin. Every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea will stand far off. When they see the smoke of her burning, they will exclaim, 'Was there ever a city like this great city?' They will throw dust on their heads and with weeping and mourning cry out, 'Woe, woe to you, great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. Rejoice over her, you heavens. Rejoice, you people of God. Rejoice, apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she imposed on you.'"
Yeah, so as you say, we're at the funeral of Babylon, and last time we heard the voice of the kings, and the kings in verse 9 and 10 are lamenting the fact that Babylon has fallen, and their specific contribution to the funeral is that we're kings and we've got power. Babylon was the great powerhouse, and yet the mightiness has come down. But here we're focusing less on power and more on luxury and wealth and exploitation, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's why John goes to such great length to describe what the merchants and the sailors do and what they trade in. This is like the first century's equivalent of a rich list, you know. So we might have a champagne and caviar and truffles, you know, that's the things they deal. It's like the richest, most expensive fare of the day.
Yeah.
And yet it would be wrong to just come away from this and thinking, well, John is just condemning business, or he's condemning companies that do very well.
All merchants everywhere.
Merchants everywhere. What is in view here is exploitation. They have made themselves rich whilst pushing the poor, or the face of the poor, deeper into the mud and treading on their backs on the way to the bank. You know, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah, and he kind of just lays it on, doesn't he? I mean, visibly in the passage, you just see line after line after line, but he is just laying it on thick. Like this is not just kind of, you know, a good, honest, hardworking businessman. This is extravagant, luxurious, gluttonous, riches. That, and also that little bit sort of slipped in at the end of verse 13. Human beings sold as slaves.
Yeah,
because you could kind of get up to that point and go, well, you know what, they're just really successful. But then that shows you their heart.
It does. And it's something that the Old Testament prophets condemn all the time. You know, you think of Amos particularly is having a go at the kind of fat cat ruling classes who sit on their beds of marble while the poor are just being decimated, you know, in the courtyards below them, and they're claiming that is a righteous way of living, but absolutely it isn't, and that's what's going on here. And you know, these exploiters are being confronted with the fall of Babylon, and the reason they're mourning and crying out, which they are in verse 15 and they are in verse 19, that the sea traders, is really because their opportunities to make more money have stopped, I think. So again, this is not the weeping of a repentant group. This is, oh no, how am I gonna keep living in luxury?
Yeah.
The system which kept me rich is gone.
Yes.
Where am I gonna make money?
Yeah, and the fact that it's gone in such a short period of time
Yeah.
as well, in 1 hour.
Yeah.
Because these things often, I mean, to have amassed this wealth, you imagine like sort of skyscrapers, don't you, in the middle of a great city, but in 1 hour brought to ruin. So it's kind of it's like paper thin in a sense. It's all there's no substance to this richness really.
Yeah.
It's not lasting richness, is it?
No. And I think there's there is a warning here for us, isn't there? Not to be enticed by the riches of Babylon. I mean, I often I don't watch them very much, but I often quite like those programs where they're documentary programs, and they'll take you into the most luxury yachts and aeroplanes, or MTV Cribs. Yeah, it used to be. I don't know if that still is even still on, but and it's quite fun, isn't it? Looking at looking at what they've got and stuff. And for most of us, that isn't really the sort of thing we crave, because it's so beyond our reach that it's just impossible to imagine. But the seeds of it are in our hearts, aren't they? If I just had a little bit more, if I was just able to get this, to have a bit more security, a bit more wealth, better holidays, better, the same enticement is there, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, Jesus, more than anyone else, really warns about the deceptive danger of wealth. It's the hole that can never be filled, and it blinds us to what is truly precious. And so we ought to learn from the fate of these merchants. Don't invest in the same way they did.
Yeah, you're right. With the parable of the seeds being sown, the seed does grow around the thorns, doesn't it? But it's the deceitfulness of wealth that kind of steals the life from it. So definitely a warning there. Yeah.
And then the third voice. So we've had the kings and the merchants, and the third voice is actually a summons to the people of God to rejoice, which is not something you find at funerals very often. They don't often end with a call to rejoice. But here there is a call, isn't there? Rejoice, you heavens! Rejoice, people of God! Rejoice, apostles and prophets! For God has judged her with the judgment she imposed on you. And this is not saying then that they ought to rejoice because it's lovely to see punishment inflicted on Babylon, but because the people of God were among those who were exploited. They were trodden down so that the empire could get rich. Yeah. And there is a vindication here, like the judgment that they imposed has been reversed. There's been a great reversal, and we should rejoice because God is the holy judge, and He has brought justice for His people.
You think back also to the saints under the throne, saying, "How long, O God, until you deal with this?" And then here we have it. Finally, you can rejoice, people of God, because the judgment has come, and we've seen throughout Revelation that this judgment is a good thing. That it's God's goodness and His character and His justice to sort of bring this. So it's not a God who enjoys sort of punishing for no reason, but it is perfect and righteous judgment.
Absolutely. So that is something that we can rejoice in, the holiness and the judgment of God. And but let us also heed the warning to beware of the enticement of wealth. Join us tomorrow, and we'll be starting in the last part of chapter 18.